Hello and welcome to the analysis of the Hindu newspaper dated December 13th, 2022. In this video, we are going to talk about two important newspaper articles. Now, these articles are going to be very important, very significant for the civil services examination. But this doesn't discard the fact that other articles which are present in the Hindu newspaper weren't important. So, as a list of important newspaper articles which were present in the Hindu newspaper dated December 13th. Now this particular list is also downloadable from our Telegram channel, so you can join us on Telegram and do subscribe to this channel to never miss an update from the bureaucratic way. If this is very clear to you, let's move ahead to the first important newspaper article for the day. Now this particular newspaper article deals with what is known as inflation, and in this particular regard it deals with the retail inflation. Now this article says that retail inflation has fallen below 6% mark for first time in 2022. Let's now deep dive into this particular newspaper article. But before that, we need to understand that what is inflation. We need to understand what is this retail inflation. We need to understand what causes the retail inflation, right? So in order to understand that, first let's analyze the particular data for this particular month or previous month, right, of November. So cooling vegetable and edible oil prices drove India's retail inflation down to 5.88% in November from 6.77% in October. In October it was 6.77%. In November it is now 5.88%. That is of previous month, right? In November it was 5.88%. And this is the first time since January this year that the consumer prices have risen slower than 6% tolerance threshold set for the Reserve Bank of India. Now, the food price inflation faced by the consumer eased to a 11-month low of 4.67% from over 7% in October. Now, this is a very positive thing. But for the rural consumers, there is a problem because they face a greater burden with 5.2% price rise in food items compared to 3.7% for their urban peers. And overall, rural retail inflation also stayed high at 6.09%. For the urban consumers, it is lesser. For the rural consumers, it has relatively remained the same, right? Now that we have understood this particular data happens every month. Every month, this particular data is released. So now this particular data is not relevant. What's important or what's relevant is to understand the inflation. What are the different kinds of inflation and what causes the inflation in general, right? So what is inflation? Inflation is basically a rise in the general price level, which can be translated as the decline in the purchasing power over the time. Now when there is an increase in the prices of the commodities, what will happen? We have the same amount of money. We earlier had 10 rupees. Now also we have 10 rupees. So what is going to do? What is going to happen if there is an increase in the prices? Our purchasing power is going to decrease. Now, rate at which the purchasing power drops can be reflected in the average price increase of a basket of selected goods and services over some period of time. Now, the rise in prices, which is often expressed as percentage, means that a unit of currency effectively buys less than it did in the prior periods. As we have discussed, that the income is remaining the same, that is 10 rupees, but the prices of the commodities are increasing, and this will lead to decrease in the purchasing power, right? So this is the fundamental meaning of inflation. Now there's good inflation, there's bad inflation. Inflation at a controlled rate is good inflation. Inflation at an uncontrolled level, which cannot be controlled, which is controlled by the markets, is bad inflation, right? So now what causes this particular inflation? So an increase in the supply of money is the root cause of inflation, though this can play out through different mechanisms in the economy. Whenever there is going to be an increase in the supply of money, then and there the demand of the commodities will increase, but the demand is not fulfilled, and that is why the prices will keep on increasing because the buying power of the people is more. Now, printing and giving away money to the citizens is one of the main causes of the inflation, and apart from it, legally devaluing the legal tender currency is also an important indicator of inflation. Then we have loaning new money into the existence as the reserve account credits through the banking system by purchasing government bonds from the banks on secondary market. So what is happening in all of the cases? We are increasing the supply of the money. Now when you increase the supply of money, what happens? The demand for the commodities is going to increase. Now the demand is increasing, money supply is increasing, and the prices are generally going to go up. When the prices are generally going up, then your purchasing power will generally decrease, right? And that will be the cause of the inflation. And in all of the cases, the money ends up losing its purchasing power. You are losing your what is called PP, purchasing power, right? It is decreasing. Prices are rising, increasing, and the purchasing power, that is PP, it is decreasing, right? So these are the causes of inflation. Now it can be subdivided, or the causes of the inflation can be divided into three categories. Now the first category is demand pull inflation, which includes, we'll discuss about it later, right? And the second one is the cost push inflation, and the third one is the built-in inflation. Now these are the three subcategories of the causes of inflation. And the first thing is the demand pull inflation. Now demand pull inflation occurs when an increase in the supply of money and credit stimulates the overall demand for the goods and services to increase more rapidly than the economy's production capacity. So the production capacity is generally remaining the same, right? It's constant. But what is going to increase? Demand is increasing because people have more money. Now the demand is increasing for the same kind of commodities, and the production is not increasing at that level, it is remaining the same. What is going to happen? There is going to be an increase in demand, and this will push the prices. Now this increases demand and leads to price increases. When people have more money, it leads to positive consumer sentiment, which means that people are willing to buy more. Now this in turn leads to higher spending, which pulls prices higher. Now it creates a demand supply gap because the demand is not getting fulfilled, and demand is not getting fulfilled, right? So it will lead to higher demand and less flexible supply, which results in higher prices. So this is what is known as demand pull inflation. When the demand is increasing, but you are not able to suffice that particular demand, this is known as demand pull inflation. Let's now move ahead to the next type of inflation. The next kind of inflation is cost push inflation, right? So now in cost push inflation, there is an increase in the prices through rise in the production cost. Whenever there is an increase in the production cost, it may be due to many factors, right? It may be due to the increase in the amount of raw materials, It may be due to many other factors. Now there is a negative economic shock to the supply of key commodities, that is the raw materials. The prices of the raw materials are increasing. Now the prices of the raw materials are increasing. This will lead to increase in the production cost. Now increase in the production cost will generally lead to the products being sold for the higher amount. Now these developments lead to higher cost for the finished product or services and work their way into the rising consumer prices. For example, when the money supply is expanded, that is increased, it creates a speculative boom in the oil prices. This means that the cost of energy can rise and contribute to rising consumer prices, which is reflected in various measures of the inflation. Now this is known as cost push inflation. Now we have another kind of inflation which is known as built-in inflation. Whenever the people have an expectation or an idea that current inflation rates are going to continue in the future, what is going to happen? They are going to demand more wages in order to maintain their standards of living. Now this will lead to a spiral which is known as wage price spiral, because you're demanding the more money in just the speculation that the inflation is going to increase. It will lead to increase in the prices of the commodities, right? Because the money supply is increasing, but the demand for the same kind of products is increasing. Now their increased wages result in higher cost of goods and services, and this wage price spiral continues as one factor induces the other and vice versa. For example, if an Uber driver is asking for more money because inflation is there, what is going to happen? You are going to pay more for the Uber. Now the Uber cost is rising or the taxi charges are increasing, what it will lead to? You will ask your employer to increase your wages, right? Now this increase in the wages will be costly for the employer. So the employer will increase the amount of services or goods, or the prices of the goods and services. Now goods and services are altogether bought by the people themselves. Now when the people get the same amount of commodities for higher prices, it will lead to what is known as wage price spiral. You are getting it right? So this is known as wage price spiral, because increase in the wages will increase the prices of the commodities. Price of the commodities will somehow lead to people demanding more wages, and this cycle will go on, and the inflation will go on and on. This is known as built-in inflation. So these are the three causes of inflation. First one was the demand pull inflation, second one is the cost push inflation, and the third one is the built-in inflation. Now that we have talked about the causes of inflation, let's talk about the various price indexes in order to measure the inflation. Right? So depending upon the selected set of goods and services used, multiple types of baskets of goods are calculated and tracked as price indexes. Now these price indexes are generally of two types, right? CPI, which is known as consumer price index, and the second one is wholesale price index. Consumer price index is what measures at the consumer level or the retail level. Now the wholesale price index is what measures the basket of goods at the wholesale level. At what wholesale level? You know the wholesalers, right? Wholesalers, retailers, producers, wholesalers, retailers. At the wholesaler level, it is known as wholesale price index. Now, according to the CPI and WPI, we have three types of indexes. First one is the CPI. We have the consumer price index first, then we have the wholesale price index, and then we have also another kind of index which is known as producer price index. All right, and in terms of inflation, we can call it consumer price inflation, then we have the wholesale price inflation. Let's now talk about the various indexes. Now CPI is basically the measure of weighted averages of prices of basket of goods and services which are of primary consumer needs. All the needs of the consumers which are very primary, right, which are very important. For example, the transportation, food and medical care are going to come under the consumer price index. Now the prices in consideration are the retail prices of each item as available for the purchase by the individual citizens, and changes in the CPI are used to assess price changes associated with the cost of living, making it one of the most frequently used statistics for identifying periods of inflation or deflation, because you are dealing with the very primary needs of the consumers. That is why these any increase or decrease in the CPI will lead to what? Inflation. Now the consumer price inflation is generally used by many of the statisticians in order to assess the health of an economy, right? Now that we have talked about CPI, let's now talk about WPI, which is known as wholesale price index. Now when you measure the price indexes at the wholesale level, then they are going to be named as WPI. It measures and tracks the changes in the price of goods in stages before the retail level, right? Now while WPI items vary from one country to other, they mostly include items at the producer or wholesale level. And for example, it includes cotton prices for raw cotton, cotton yarn, cotton grey goods and cotton clothing. Although many countries and organizations use WPI, many other countries including the US use a similar variant, the PPI. Now in the CPI, we have talked about buying of the commodities. In the wholesale level, we have also talked about buying of the commodities. Now in the PPI, we talk about the selling. All right, we see it from the selling perspective, right? So PPI is a family of indexes that measures the average change in the selling prices received by the domestic producers of intermediate goods and services over the time. In the CPI, what we saw buying of the commodities by the consumers. In the WPI, we saw the buying of the commodity by the wholesalers. In the PPI, we are going to see the selling of the commodities by the wholesalers. Now the PPI measures price changes from the perspective of the seller and differs from the CPI, which measures price changes from the perspective of the buyers, right? So this is known as PPI, or producer price index. Now that we have talked about all the indexes, we have talked about all the kinds of inflation, that is the demand pull inflation or the cost push inflation. We have talked about built-in inflation. Let's now talk about the advantages of the inflation, right? So inflation, no doubt, has many of the disadvantages. It decreases the power of purchasing power of the money, but it also leads to some of the advantages. First one is it leads to higher resale value of the assets. For example, if you have bought a plot of land and you wish to sell it for the higher prices, it is going to be only possible when there is an inflation in the real estate, right? So inflation leads to higher resale value of the assets, which brings you more money. And the second one is the optimum levels of inflation encourages spending. When there is an inflation, then the people are going to spend more, right? So this is some of the advantages of the inflation. Now that we have talked about the advantages of inflation, let's now talk about the disadvantages of the inflation, because there are many disadvantages to the inflation. So the first disadvantage is buyers have to pay more for the products and services, right? This is the main disadvantage of the inflation. For the same amount of products and services, you have to pay more. Second is it imposes higher prices on the economy, and the third one is that it drives some prices up first and others later. For example, the primary goods which we need for the general consumption, these prices are going to increase. When there is going to be an increase in the primary products or the products which we need at the earliest, or which are very essential for the human survival, then it is going to be a disadvantage for us, right? So these are some of the disadvantages of the inflation. We have talked about the inflation, we have talked about the retail inflation, we have talked about all kinds of inflation, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. Let's now head to the next important newspaper article. Now this particular newspaper article talks about Energy Conservation Amendment Bill. Now this is an amendment bill, right? So there must be an act. So the act this particular bill seeks to amend what is known as Energy Conservation Act 2001. So we are going to talk about Energy Conservation Act 2001. We are also going to talk about Energy Conservation Amendment Bill 2022. And then we are going to talk about what are the issues regarding this particular bill. So let's deep dive into this particular newspaper article. So this article says that Rajya Sabha on Monday passed the Energy Conservation Amendment Bill, clearing the decks for mandate use of non-fossil sources, including green hydrogen, green ammonia, biomass and ethanol for energy and feedstock, and established carbon markets in the country. Now the Lok Sabha had passed the bill earlier in August. Now it is going to become an act. This is going to happen, right? Now let's talk about the Energy Conservation Act 2001, which this particular bill, which is known as Energy Conservation Amendment Bill 2022, seeks to amend, right? So the Energy Conservation Act 2001 provides a framework for regulating energy consumption and promoting energy efficiency and energy conservation. Now energy efficiency in this case means using less energy to perform the same task. So it seeks to regulate what? Energy consumption. It seeks to lessen the use of energy, and it also promotes energy efficiency, because energy consumption can only be regulated and improved only when there is an efficient energy. So this is the main purpose of this particular Conservation Act. This was the main purpose which was highlighted in 2001 Act, right? So the Act has set up Bureau of Energy Efficiency to recommend regulations and standards for energy consumption. Now these apply to appliances, vehicles, industries, industrial and commercial establishments and buildings. Alright. So under this particular act, there is a bureau which is known as Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which is going to regulate and standardize the energy consumption. In order to implement this particular act, this particular Bureau of Energy Efficiency is there, right? Now this particular act has many positives. For example, efforts towards the energy conservation and energy efficiency are among the key instruments envisaged for the climate change mitigation, which this particular bill seeks to do, right? It seeks to do what? Conserve the energy, and it is also going to make the energy more efficient, right? So effort on these fronts lower the energy conservation, energy generation requirement, and thereby reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. Now these also have positive implications for the energy security in a country like India, which relies on imports to meet some of its energy needs. Now these are some of the things that this particular bill envisaged to do, and these are some of the positives of the Energy Conservation Act 2001. Now there is a particular data which has been presented by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Now as per the estimate, programs for efficient energy use have developed India save about 28 million tons of oil equivalent energy in 2019-2020. Now this particular amount of energy could light about 185 crore 20 watt LED bulbs 24/7 for a year. Now this particular bill, this particular act is very important, very significant, but it needs to meet some of the requirements of the present. For example, we have commitments which are being made in the COP26. So during the COP26, during the COP26 summit in 2021, India made the following commitments which may be relevant for the energy efficiency efforts. Because we need to improve on all of these fronts, that is why we have introduced this particular amendment bill. Now the first thing, or the first commitment we made, is that we will reduce total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030. Now we have also said that we will also reduce the carbon intensity of economy by 45% by 2030 over 2005 labels. Now mind it, carbon intensity is defined as the volume of carbon emissions per unit of the GDP. This is what we are going to reduce by 45% as compared to the 2005 and 2030, right? In 2030, we are going to reduce it by 45% from the 2005 labels. Now, in addition to this, India aims to have 500 gigawatts of non-fossil energy capacity and meet 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy by 2030. And all of these things need an amendment in the Energy Conservation Act, right? So we have introduced what is known as Energy Conservation Amendment Bill 2022, and the bill seeks to amend the 2001 Act to facilitate the achievement of COP26 goals, and it is also going to introduce concepts such as mandated use of non-fossil sources and carbon credit trading to ensure faster decarbonization of the Indian economy. So these are the main goals of this particular bill. Now that we have talked about the goals of this particular bill, let's now talk about the actual bill. So here are the key features of this particular bill. So the first feature is the carbon credit trading. Now the bill empowers the central government to specify a carbon credit trading scheme. Now how this particular carbon credit trading scheme is going to be implemented, it is not very clear. Now the carbon credit implies a tradable permit to produce a specified amount of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse emissions, right? This is the fundamental purpose of this carbon credit trading scheme, so as to provide some kind of certificates in order to certify the industries which are producing less of the carbon or the kind of carbon you are emitting, right? Now the central government or any authorized agency may issue carbon credit certificates to entities registered and compliant with the scheme, and the entities will be entitled to trade the certificates. Now that your industry is using more of the non-fossil fuels, you can also get credits from other agencies. For example, if my company A is producing less of the non-fossil fuels, or it is producing less carbon emissions, then it can trade its particular certificate to carbon to company B, which is producing more of the sorry, which is producing more of the carbon emissions, right? Now any other person may also purchase a carbon credit certificate on a voluntary basis, right? So this is known as carbon credit trading scheme, where you trade the carbon credits. And what are carbon credits? It means tradable permits to produce a specified amount of carbon dioxide on greenhouse emissions, right? So this is the first feature. Now the second feature is obligation to use non-fossil fuel sources of energy. Now the earlier act of 2001 empowered the central government to specify energy consumption standards. Now this particular bill adds that the government may require designated consumers to meet a minimum share of energy consumption for non-fossil sources. It makes it more obligatory on the entities to reduce their non-fossil sources, and different consumption thresholds may be specified for different non-fossil sources and consumer categories, such as industries such as mining, steel, textile, chemicals, petrochemicals, transport sector including railways, commercial buildings as specified as under the schedule. Now they will have to meet minimum share of energy consumption from the non-fossil sources. They have to implement more of the sources, more of the instruments in order to meet the non-fossil sources requirement, right? And failure to do this will be punishable, and failure to do this will be punishable with a penalty of up to 10 lakh rupees, and it will also attract an additional penalty of up to twice the price of oil equivalent of energy consumed over the prescribed norm. So this is the obligation regarding this particular bill. And the third one is now the energy conservation code for buildings. Now the companies are set up in the buildings, so the particular buildings will have more of the obligations, right? So act earlier, the 2001 Act empowered the central government to specify energy conservation code for buildings. Now the code prescribes energy consumption standards in the terms of the area. Now this particular bill amends this to provide for energy conservation and sustainable building code. Now this particular new code will provide norms for energy efficiency and conservation, use of renewable energy and other requirements for the green buildings. So now you have to set up more of the green buildings which use more of the renewable energy, right? So this is the first part of it. The second part is that under the act of 2001, the energy conservation code applies to the commercial buildings. Now under this particular bill, the new energy conservation and sustainable building code will also apply to office and residential buildings meeting the above criteria. Now the bill empowers the state governments to lower the load thresholds. So this is it regarding the energy conservation code for buildings. Now the fourth feature is regarding the standard for the vehicles and the vessels. Now under the act, the energy consumption standards, under the act of 2001, the energy consumption standards may be specified for equipments and appliances which consume, generate, transmit or supply energy. Now according to this particular bill, the scope to include vehicles and vessels is also there, right? Now this particular thing has been expanded to the vehicles as well as vessels, right? Earlier in the act we had only equipments. In this particular bill we also have vehicles and the vessels, right? And the failure to comply with the standards will be punishable with a penalty of 10 lakh rupees, and the non-compliance in case of vessels will attract an additional penalty of up to twice the price of oil equivalent of energy consumed above the prescribed limit. Now the vehicle manufacturers in violation of the fuel consumption norms will be liable to pay a penalty of up to rupees 50,000 per unit of vehicles sold. All right. So this is regarding the vehicles and the vessels. Now we also have the composition, or there is going to be some amendments to the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, right? So now the Act of 2001 provides for setting up of Bureau of Energy Efficiency. We all know that it had also estimates as well. We have discussed the estimates, right? So now the Bureau of Energy Efficiency at this particular point of time, according to the Act of 2001, has a governing council with members between 20 and 26 in number. Now these include secretaries of the 6 departments, representatives of regulatory authorities such as the Central Electricity Authority and the Bureau of Indian Standards, right? And it has up to 4 members representing the industries and the consumers. So this was according to the Act of 2001. Now the bill amends to this to provide that the number of members will be between 31 and 37. So this particular Bureau of Energy Efficiency is going to increase in strength. Now it increases the number of secretaries to 12. Earlier it was around 6, right? Secretaries of the 6 department. So earlier it was 6. Now these particular secretaries are going to become 12, and it also provides for up to 7 members representing industries and the consumers. Earlier it was what, 4? Now it has increased to 7, right? So these are the amendments in this particular bill, right? So there are many positives to this particular bill, but there are many issues involved with this particular bill. For example, the first case, that is of the carbon credit trading. Now carbon credit trading aims to reduce carbon emissions and hence address climate change. But what happens is that, what is the main question is that, what ministry will implement it? Now according to this bill, the Ministry of Power is going to regulate this particular scheme. But the question is the Ministry of Power appropriate to regulate this particular scheme? Because Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is also responsible for the carbon credit trading, right? So a further question is whether the market regulator for carbon credit trading should be specified in this particular act, right? So this is the main question. And the second one is the same activity may be eligible for renewable energy, energy savings and the carbon credit certificates. All of these are different certificates, right? Now that you have a very good solar energy installed in your home or in your office, then you are going to get what? Renewable energy certificates. You are also going to get energy saving certificate, and you are also going to get carbon credit certificate, right? The question is whether these particular certificates or these 3 types of certificates are interchangeable with each other. And the designated consumers must meet certain non-fossil energy use obligations. Now there is an energy mix happening, and the discom companies, you get energy from what? Sometimes you get it from the coal energy, sometimes you are getting it from the hydro energy, and sometimes you are getting it from the what? You are getting it from solar energy. But the distribution companies in an area have a monopoly. If you are living in Jharkhand, you are most likely to get get your electricity from what? The coal power plants or thermal power plants. Then you are going to have more obligation regarding this area, more obligation in the carbon credits, right? So given the limited competition among the discoms in any area, consumers may not have a choice in the energy mix, which is what this particular bill envisages to do. So this is the main issue. These are the 3 issues we have discussed. Now these issues must be addressed, or they may be addressed in the further acts or something like that, but these are the main issues which are with this particular bill, and opposition has also highlighted this particular bill. So the government should look into some of the issues of this particular bill, and it needs to make the this particular amendment bill, energy conservation amendment bill, more specific, right? So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article, and this is it for the day. Thank you from my side. Do like and share the video and subscribe to this channel. Have a good day. Bye.